This lens is a world's first lens, and it's pretty incredible that it's actually made by Sony. There is one major thing that's going to stop people from buying this that we do have to talk about in this video. So when Sony contacted me via Zoom call to tell me about the 50 to 150 lens, I was extremely excited. My go-to focal length for sports and action is 50mm, and having the ability to zoom to 150 for tight shots is crucial for speed. But this is also an f2 constant aperture lens, which for this type of focal length is the world's first. So my immediate reaction was to go out and film my sports, but also set up a fashion shoot and photograph both to see what I can get from this potential game-changing lens. So we got a lot to talk about in this video. Now, right from the start, we have to talk about the usability of this lens when it comes to using this on set. Now, I know there's going to be a whole bunch of people on YouTube making videos of these, but it really does come down to how does this perform hands-on in the real world on actual professional shoots. Now, I've used this on a couple of shoots now, and one of the major things I love testing is just the ergonomics, how the autofocus is, and absolutely everything that you would actually need when it comes to using this on a professional shoot. Now, the 28 to 70 f2 actually had some slower autofocusing performance with my Sony FX6. Obviously, the FX6 isn't as fast as the newer Sony cameras with the AI chip, but it's not even as fast as the FX3, and this has been found, many times before. And pairing the 28 to 70, it did have its autofocus issues. Sure, I was putting it into some pretty interesting and tough situations, but this is the whole point of testing these in real world situations, because it's real world. You're going to encounter a whole bunch of things that's going to block the frame and ergonomic issues. This is what you need to understand, is that real world testing is definitely one of the best things when it comes to these types of lenses, or any lenses, for instance. But in saying that, did I have any autofocus issues with this? Well, no, not at all. Paired with the FX6, this thing performed absolutely incredible. It was completely different to the 28 to 70. It seemed faster, it seemed more tacky, and obviously I was getting some micro jitters because at 150mm on the FX6, which the FX6 doesn't have any IBIS, it was a little bit shaky, but it is expected. Like, the FX6 has no IBIS, but it is weighted down, so it isn't as crazy when it comes to the micro jitters. But if you're using this on a really old Sony camera, then I could imagine there would be some micro jitters. But majority of the newer Sony cameras has IBIS inside. You won't get any micro jitters at that 150 long end. Now, I do have to mention that this lens doesn't have OSS like the 70-200 or all the other long telephoto lenses. So is this going to be a big determining factor if you're not going to be getting this lens and maybe getting a 70-200 lens perhaps? I really don't think the stability is going to be an issue for most people, especially when it comes to the newer Sony bodies, because, the IBIS and the active stability inside the Sony cameras. So there shouldn't really be an issue. Like I said, with the FX6 or the FX9, where there isn't any IBIS in the bodies, this is probably where you're going to notice it at that long end. Now, we do have to discuss that this is a 50mm to 150mm f2, so it's a constant f2. Now, Tamron does have the 35 to 150, but it's an f2 to 2.8, and it does creep up pretty fast. It's an f2, I think, from 35 to 42-ish, and then it goes to a 2.5, and then it goes to a 2.8 quite quick. But this stays a constant f2, which is insane. And the size of this lens is apparent. Like, it obviously keeps that constant f2 aperture, so it will have to have larger elements in here to allow for that f2 constant aperture. But when it comes to the overall weight, I mean, it's very similar to a 70 to 200, but that 70 to 200 is an f2.8. This is a constant f2 aperture. So I really do feel like this is going to suit a lot of people who want that low light performance. So wedding photographers and videographers, sports and wildlife photographers, videographers, and pretty much just anyone who does sort of run and gun event videography. This is going to be an incredible lens to buy. Now, I guess there is one pretty major reason why this is a relatively large sized lens is that it has full internal zoom. So it doesn't actually extend the barrel like some of the other telephoto lenses. It all zooms inside the actual lens. So pretty much what you see is what you get. It's going to be great for people who use tripods and you won't have any unbalanced setups, or for that extreme rare occasion that you have to balance this on an RE Trinity or some sort of gimbal setup. So the image quality on this thing is absolutely incredible, and obviously it's a G Master lens, and when Sony are making G Master lens, they're making their image quality pretty much next to none. Like, especially when it comes to these newer versions with the XT linear focusing motors, the newer coding, the better design, like overall this lens is absolutely incredible. So look, judging at the image quality, I mean, this thing is absolutely tack sharp in the center and out to the corners, literally through the whole focal range. It is incredible results when it comes to this lens, wide open at f2. And obviously, if you do start stopping it down, it just gets incredibly sharp and sharper. Optically, this thing is absolutely perfect. But when it comes to distortion, we do have some barrel distortion at 50 millimeters. At 70 millimeters, it tends to be more of a pin cushion, very slight. 100 and 150, it's that pin cushioning, but nothing crazy. And this is with lens corrections off. Obviously, when there is lens corrections, it will correct this with no problems. And when it comes to the longitudinal chromatic aberrations, I mean, there's pretty much none on this thing. And when it comes to regular chromatic aberrations, there also pretty much is none. Now, when we have a look at the flaring, it doesn't really seem to flare too much at the 50, 75, 100, or 150 millimeters. It is pretty well controlled. There are some, small flaring artifacts, but nothing crazy. So this lens is just incredibly clean all round. Now, what I did say in the 28 to 70 f2 video is that one of the small downsides or the caveats was the front filter thread. Now, it's a 95 millimeter front filter thread, but I am using a 95 to 82 step down ring to fit this ND filter on the front. And I've had pretty much no issues. It doesn't really seem like there is any noticeable vignetting around the edges, having an 82 millimeter front filter thread. So if I did have this and test it in the 28 to 70, I'd probably report the same, especially if you are filming wide open. But even if you do stop it down to, f4, f5.6, f8, you still don't really see any vignetting around the edges. So having that step down ring is definitely going to be needed if you have these kind of ND filters. Otherwise, you're just going to have to use a larger matte box system, or the FX6 has internal ND filters, so got no issues there. And now that Sony are creating these lenses for photographers and videographers, it just makes this almost a no-brainer, but there is that hefty price tag that's really going to stop a lot of people from buying this lens. Now look, we've got to talk about the pricing, because the pricing structure is a bit confusing, specifically because of the new tariffs in the US. But I can talk about the Australian pricing. It's 6,799 Australian, which is the standard price that's going to obviously drop, but the prices will get lower after the release. Now it's 34.99 USD ERP, but like I said, tariffs, not 100% sure what's going on there. Now Tamron and Samyang offer the 35 to 150, but it's an f2 to an f2.8, so it is a variable aperture. So if you do zoom in and zoom out, it will darken up the image just that little bit, unless you leave it in an f2.8, and it will be obviously consistent aperture. But this just offers you that f2, which gives you a little bit more light in those low light situations. So you really do have to weigh up the pros and cons when it comes to that. This Samyang lens in Australia is about $17.99, which is significantly cheaper. And the Tamron lens is $24.99, which once again is still significantly cheaper. But you don't have that constant f2 aperture. You've got a variable aperture of f2 to 2.8, and you don't have that G Master quality. And these don't internally zoom, they actually externally zoom, so the barrel actually extends out from the body. So there are some pretty significant differences between these lenses, but it really does come down to budget here. And also, one major thing I do have to mention is if you got the A1 or A1 II or A9 Mark III and you're going to use 120 frames per second with stills, the Sony G Master lens is going to perform way better than the Tamron and Samyang. And this could be a firmware thing where it's actually in the software telling those third-party lenses to slow down a little bit, but the Sony lenses are always going to perform better than third-party lenses at these really high fast burst rates. So for professionals, this is brilliant news. Now, obviously, one of the key reasons why you would get the 50 to 150 is you're going to be replacing pretty much 3 to 4 prime lenses. You're going to be replacing your standard 50mm, your 85, the 105 and 135. And the 105 and 135mm f1.8 is already a large lens. And if you're going to be replacing, just those two lenses and adding a couple of other focal lengths, I mean, this lens is kind of a no-brainer, but you do still have to take that price into consideration because it is really expensive. But if you're replacing 3 or 4 lenses, then it's going to be cheaper than getting 3 or 4 lenses, but not just cheaper. You're actually going to be saving so much more space when it comes to the whole event or traveling. This lens is probably a good option for those kind of people. Now, it does come with an inbuilt lens collar, which you can actually take the feet off it, but it is great, and it's very similar to the longer end lenses like the 70 to 200, the 200 to 600, and all those kind of lenses, but you can actually rotate the ring by turning this knob and then aligning it with the little black dots. It's really nice. I do wish that there was a little bit of feedback where you could actually feel where those dots are, but it is very smooth if you prefer it that way. I just prefer if I could actually feel where those dots are so I could perfectly align it vertically or horizontally. Now, one of the most impressive things that I absolutely love about this is the minimum focusing distance. Like at the widest end at 50mm, you've got 0.4 meters, and at the longer telephoto, it's 0.74 meters. Now, this is in autofocus. In manual focus, you can actually dial it in just a touch closer. But that is pretty good. It's obviously not macro-like, but you can still get really nice and close to the talent, which is really impressive with this lens. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. I'll obviously put a link in the description below if you do want to check this one out. But it's obviously highly recommended from me, but the price tag is pretty expensive, so it really depends on if you can actually afford this. But I would see a lot of professionals utilizing this, travel photographers, videographers, even just hobbyists that really want one lens to pretty much rule them all. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.